Chronicles, Fiction. The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 2, Frenzy, by John Allen Price. Chapter 1. Master Ragathol, we're ready to enter Venus orbit, said the courier's ship's pilot. Do you wish to come forward and observe? The necromutant had barely finished his advisory when the cockpit hatch slid open, allowing in the ship's lone passenger. Ragathol limped slightly and held one of his arms at his side as he made his way forward. He stopped when the increasingly narrow cockpit could no longer accommodate his massive frame and looked up. What had hours before been only a bright point of light in the heavens was now a majestic swirl of white, blue, and green. It filled most of the cockpit's front and overhead windows. For a few moments, even Ragathol was transfixed by the planet's beauty. It's green, Kalikaba, said the Nepharite, scanning his destination through the overhead windows. And blue. This is so unlike the world the humans created out of Luna. It resembles the description of what their original Earth once looked like. In centuries past, this world was uninhabitable, even to us, Kalikaba replied. His maneuvers for orbital insertion over, he could afford a brief gaze at their destination. Its atmosphere was pure carbon dioxide. It rained acid, and the surface temperature made metals run liquid. The humans are to be respected for the ways they've changed this world. Yes, their machines and their worlds are to be coveted, but the humans themselves are irritating fools. Like all similar races we've encountered, their fate is to be conquered and turned to serve us. What maneuver are you completing now? Entry attitude positioning. We'll only do a fractional polar orbit, my master. If we were to remain aloft any longer, we would attract sustained attention from the human military forces. This way, we'll arrive at the Citadel before any humans even ask us for our registration number. Instead of entering equatorial orbit like all other arriving spacecraft, the tiny Gamma-class courier dropped into Venus orbit over its north pole. Kalikaba immediately rolled the ship off its back and raised its nose until it was skimming across the Venusian atmosphere on its belly. It skirted the planet's terminator line between night and day, for the moment not visible to anyone on the ground attempting to track it, and by the time it finished landing at the Citadel, night would have fallen. We're approaching the atmospheric interface, Kalikaba continued. You should return to the passenger cabin for the rest of re-entry. No, I will see it from here, said Ragathol, moving to the back of the cockpit and lowering one of the jump seats. As he did so, he glanced out the port windows at the sparkling fields of light that spread across the planet's night side. Millions, 1,000 million humans, and more. The conquest of this world will be our greatest triumph. If we win it for Algaroth, then he'll stand alone among the apostles. Not even Ilion could challenge his power. Minutes later, the view from all of the windows on the spacecraft was lost as it became enveloped in a plasma sheath of ionizing gases. For the next dozen minutes, it plunged through the Venusian atmosphere like a glowing meteor. It was readily visible against the evening sky. However, most of this occurred over the planet's equatorial oceans and barren deserts. By the time it emerged from the blackout layer, its undersurfaces no longer glowed, and the black technology that corrupted its basic clean design rendered it all but invisible to radar. The courier arced over the cities of the southern hemisphere and descended to land in the remote Antarctic region claimed by both capital and mission, yet occupied by neither megacorporation. Brother Ragathol, we congratulate your escape from Luna, said the Nepharite leading the arrival delegation. It's fortunate this ship was available to facilitate it. Yes, the fate of the apostles favored me, said Ragathol, descending from the ship's main hatch. He scanned the desolate terrain from the stairway and found little to see beyond the service towers that surrounded the pad the ship had taxied to. Brother Azarath, I thought your Citadel was more developed in its construction than this. Below ground is almost complete. The above-ground structure will be its final stage. Azeroth's response grew cold with each word, yet he was able to retain his official civility with his guest. Do you think their fate will be kind to you? Algaroth is displeased with your failure. It was not my fault. The humans I faced were better than I had been led to believe. He isn't interested in your excuses for failure. Neither am I. He has no desire to punish you further, but if you wish to regain his favor, you must work for it. Like you, I am his servant, Ragathol answered. He stepped up to Azarath and faced him briefly, then backed away and with difficulty lowered his head. What task does he wish of me? The human female I sent you, said Azarath. The receptacle of the visions. For some reason, the humans have returned her to this world. In his beneficence, Lord Algaroth tasks you with retrieving her. He further orders that you be given sufficient forces to accomplish this end. This is a task for a necromutant, or even some heretics, not me. I wish a task more worthy. You lost the woman. You lost all of your forces on Luna. Algaroth considers it appropriate for you to retrieve her and bring her to his defiled castle. To his castle, said Ragathol, mulling over the words, and slowly a smile crept onto his face. To be at his seat of power. Yes, such a small task can have great consequences. I accept. Where's the woman located? Capital has her, said Azarath. As he responded, he signaled to his necromutants, and moments later, the massive circular pad the courier ship and those around it stood on began lowering silently into the ground. They picked her up at their spaceport and moved her to a hospital not far from it. As of yet, they're unaware of her importance. You should be able to accomplish this task quickly.
Zero time 11:23 hours. Mission time 8:45 hours. 2. Battle Station Lucas, 11:38. Senior Military Advisor C. Hart. From Dirk Bamble, Advisor, Special Forces Squad Trident. Encryption code. Capital Fox Alpha 973 Sierra. Mission summary. Supplemental. By using unorthodox jamming strategy and assault tactics, Captain Mitch Hunter successfully attacked the Cybertronic observation post at grid reference 4A6/7X7. The newly completed facility had an improved defense system, but this proved ineffective against our new extended AG assault rifles proved very capable in firing this new munition. This did not jam or misfire during the entire combat phase of this operation. We are now awaiting egress at our evac point. If Lieutenant Alvarez is following a standard deviation path, we should know it as...
Damn it, Hunter. You'll die for this, Bamble shouted, leaping away from his briefcase-sized transceiver set. The spray of plastic shards from its exterior shell and the fragments of silicon chips was still falling and mixing with the dust raised by the 6-round burst. What the hell's the matter with you? We're still in hostile territory, Bungle, said Mitch Hunter, the spent shell casings from his rifle still bouncing around his feet. And the ban on everything except essential radio traffic is still in force. What did you call me, Captain? I'd like to call you missing in action, but your directorate would only assign me someone else just like you. And the men have grown fond of you. Yeah, who do you think gave you the name Bungle in the first place? Sergeant Leo Vanetti added. He was standing closer to the plateau's edge and was busy scanning the western horizon with a pair of electronic binoculars. The captain's busy with other things such as where we'll dump your body if you keep disobeying his orders. Combat has ended, Sergeant, said Bamble, turning his attention to the enlisted men, and according to corporate protocol, I'm entitled to transmit battle reports. And even if Cybertronic were monitoring the frequency I use, they still can't read what I send because of the encryption system I have. Don't go quoting protocol out here, said Hunter. We're still 120 clicks from the capital frontier. We just blasted the last Cybertronic observation post, and Julia hasn't picked us up yet. It doesn't matter if Cybertronic can read what you sent or not. They can pinpoint where you sent it from, even if it's a burst transmit. Captain, I got movement, warned one of the other squad members. Sergeant Jacob Shacker. Unlike Vanetti, the stoutly built black man scanned the same horizon with his weapon, a Vampire SR-50 sniper rifle. Ponderously large, its weight was partially lessened by the absence of a clip and the 4 pounds of ammunition it carried. Shacker moved the weapon slowly, mostly to prevent the image from blurring in his digital scope. Aircraft max range. Leo, do you confirm? Said Hunter. Not yet, Captain. I got too much heat distortion at distance, said Vanetti. God, I hate the desert. Captain, do you want me to set up portable radar? Asked Lieutenant Raymond Rogers, grabbing his backpack. Never mind, said Hunter. By the time you set up, we'll be able to eyeball whatever is out there. Captain, they're helicopter gunships, said Shacker. Cybertronic Sky Witch class, and there's a lot of them. What does that mean? Bamble nervously requested. Protocol this. Hunter spun around and punched his military advisor in the left side of his chin. Bamble's head snapped to the right, and the rest of his body followed it. He collapsed on the plateau's sun-baked surface, raising a brief cloud of fine dust. Troopers, we're leaving. Sunburst, this is Lone Wolf. We need evac now. Over. God, Captain, you want to be the next Bob Watts? Said Theodore Halston, the squad's fire support specialist, rising warily to his feet. How are we going to explain this? One of these desert dung beetles must have laid an egg in his head, said Hunter, motioning for his squad's medic to check Bamble. I think it made an overeager approach. Captain, you requested the trick, advised Diane Parker, scanning the southern horizon with her own SR-50. "I got Julia inbound and closing fast." "I have him now, Captain," said Venetti. 12 Sky Witches in 2 groups of 6. They're doing sweeps, and they're all heading this way. "It sounds like lock and load time," said Halston, grabbing the heavy machine gun by its twin pistol grips. Despite the fact the Tempest was almost the same size as the Vampire, Halston lifted it easily, and in seconds, had its breech open. "How come we're always nailing Cybertronic whenever they set up somewhere?" "No, only Diane and Jake are to arm weapons," Hunter ordered. "We're withdrawn, not fighting a pitched battle. The rest of us will prepare to board the gunship when it lands." "Captain, he only put his lights out," said Sergeant Wendy Levine, still crouching over Bamble's crumpled form. "You want me to wake him up?" "No, give him something that'll keep him out. He can whine and be a thorn in my side later, not now." Of the 10 members of the Special Forces squad, only 2 loaded their weapons, while most of the others grabbed the equipment they had stripped off in order to rest. It took them just over a minute to slip on camouflaged armor, helmets, and backpacks. They spread out and used whatever available cover they could. However, the barren plateau offered only rock outcroppings and depressions, sculpted into their bizarre forms, at a time when the planet's surface temperature would melt lead and the atmospheric pressure was 90 times that of Earth. Even now, the air pressure felt heavy to the squad members. In spite of their position atop one of the terrain's numerous plateaus, it deadened the first rumble of the helicopter rotor blades to reach the squad. "Captain, that first group of cyber choppers is at 2,000 meters and closing," informed Shacker, deploying the bipod leg of his rifle. "We can nail them with the DUD SAP rounds. Open fire on the flight leader. That should confuse them long enough for us to evac. Julia's dropped into the valley. She'll be here any moment." "Corporal, you got the leader?" "Yes, Jake," said Parker, now laying next to Shacker with her SR-50 similarly readied. "DUD's loaded and locked. 3-round burst, fire at will." In unison, Parker and Shacker opened fire on the drone helicopter formation closest to the plateau. Even in the bright sunlight, the sniper rifles had visible muzzle flashes, and each 15mm round they unleashed raised a veil of dust from the surrounding rock. 20 yards in front of their weapons, the plastic casings shed by the depleted uranium, discarded Sabbat armor-piercing shells clattered across the ground. What remained of each bullet was a solid uranium arrow, 2/3 the size of the original round. With no human crew to accommodate, the Sky Witch had a narrow, impossibly angled fuselage with a skeletal tail boom and stub wings full of weapon pods. Head on, it presented a tiny silhouette of sloped armored plating. But the uranium arrows were too heavy and moving too fast to be deflected. They punched small holes in the lead Sky Witch's skin, causing it to shudder visibly. Thin wisps of smoke curled out of the holes, the results of the helicopter's electronic systems short-circuiting. It wavered and began to slow, and moments later ejected all its external weapon pods. So did all the other crafts under its command. "Good God, talk about silicon fizzle," Shacker remarked. "Captain, did you ever see a thing like this?" "Not often, but it's better than what I could have hoped for," said Hunter, studying the disabled flight with his own binocs. "They're all paralyzed until either the leader explodes or finishes its run through its logic tree. We'll be long gone by then." The heavy air suddenly became filled with the thump of rotor blades and the growl of noise-suppressed turbines. Leaping over the plateau's far edge, the shark-like CFAH-3 cutlass bore down on the squad like a predator homing in on its prey. Its camouflage pattern of green, black, and yellow made it difficult to track against the desert background until it slowed and briefly reared into the air. From their streamlined recesses, the helicopter's main landing skids extended to a pre-selected length. When it set down, it did not raise the choking cloud of sand it had done earlier on the valley floor. Almost at once, the squad was up and running for it. They dragged what they could not carry, and when they reached the helicopter, they found the main cabin doors at exactly the proper height for easy entry.
"What happened to Dirk?"
said the cabin's lone occupant, military advisor Lynn Sutter. She moved to one of the open hatches and helped drag Bamble's limp body inside.
"He ran into something solid,"
Hunter answered, sliding into the cabin next.
"Come on, let's hurry it up. This cab's got a fast meter."
In seconds, the nearly empty cabin was filled with sand-exhausted soldiers and their battered equipment. As the hatches rolled shut, the sand and rotor wash ended, but not the noise. There were still the turbines, and now the shouting became more audible.
"You gonna help me lock Bamble's harness or not?"
asked Corporate Redfield, Halston's weapons assistant.
"What do you think?"
said Halston.
"Let him bounce around. He won't feel it."
"Julia, this is Mitch," said Hunter, plugging his headset into the cabin intercom link.
"Nail those Sky Witches before they get their act together." "We copy,"
said Lieutenant Julia Alvarez, pushing the throttle levers forward.
"You got him, Jefferson? Locking targets into the auto-fire system,"
replied the sergeant in the gunship's first cockpit. Jefferson Taylor touched each of the hostile symbols on the tactical screen and switched his forward turret to computer control.
"Just give me some altitude and I'll dust them."
A burst of power lifted the cutlass off the ground as Julia swung it to the left. The nose-mounted Gatling gun instantly began tracking the still hovering Sky Witches. The turret stopped just long enough on each to unleash a burst of several dozen 20mm shells. They were just enough to critically damage the robot helicopters, only the last of which had started to maneuver before being raked with fire. In seconds, the entire flight was spiraling out of control. The last to go down was the leader, its damage control program having finally run its course.
"Lieutenant, we're being laser tracked," Taylor continued. "It's that other flight. They're gonna launch missiles." "Decoy 'em," said Alvarez. "I'm taking us to the deck."
Its landing skids retracted. The cutlass accelerated rapidly toward the plateau's southern edge. Just as it crossed, a series of white-hot flares were ejected from either side of the machine. They burned intensely enough to attract the short-range infrared-guided missiles unleashed by the second flight of the Cybertronic aircraft. They were still exploding while Alvarez was leveling off just above the valley floor.
"They're still after us,"
said Hunter, after the cabin roof-mounted tactical terminal had been rolled down its track to him. On its screen, he could see a tactical map of the area, with the Cutlass and the Sky Witches moving erratically across it.
"And they got more forces joining in. Where the hell's our Air Force?" "Probably still waiting around the frontier," Vanetti offered. "If we climb, they'd have to spot us and step in." "We can't do that with all these drones after us."
Hunter had since changed the screen to the gun sight camera for the aft turret. After switching between its views and the tactical map, he activated his headset link.
"Julia, this is Mitch. Take the side canyon on the right. Arm cluster bombs. Set dispersal altitude for 100 meters. Set dispersal pattern for maximum spread. Set detonation time for impact plus 10 seconds.
To confuse the pursuing robots, Alvarez had kept her ship on the deck,
and gracefully S-turned it, raising a pall of fine sand behind it, effectively obscuring the optical and infrared aiming systems. It took them several seconds to realize the cutlass had broken hard to the right, enough time for the capital fast attack helicopter to enter a smaller auxiliary valley.
"Lieutenant, here they come," said Taylor, watching a swarm of dark specks appear on one of the screens.
"Range 4,000 meters. Have you programmed the cluster bombs?"
said Alvarez, glancing at the same camera tail view.
"Roger. When do we drop them?" "I'll find out. Mitch, this is Julia. When do you want fireworks?"
"Soon.
When the width of the valley approximates the dispersal pattern for the bomblets," Hunter replied, surfing rapidly between the tactical map weapons data and various external camera views. "I'll let you know when that happens." "Captain, the cluster bomb disperser is an anti-vehicle, anti-personnel weapon," said Lynn Sutter, trying to stop her unconscious teammate from bouncing out of his seat. "How will you use it to bring down airplanes?" "Not directly, but if we throw enough trouble at those drones, we'll defeat their logic trees. A sharp explosion deadened all other noises in the main cabin, except for Sutter's screaming. The helicopter lurched sharply to one side, then climbed as Alvarez compensated. A familiar chattering quickly followed. Taylor was returning fire with the aft turret. "I was gonna say I hope we can do it before the drones close to cannon range," Hunter continued, before checking again on what the terminal showed. "A few more hits like that and they'll penetrate our armor." "Mitch, this is Julia. If we're gonna spring your trap, we better do it soon," said Alvarez. "This is a box canyon, and its sides are getting mighty steep." "I know, but stay with me a few more seconds." "A few more seconds, he says," Taylor remarked, while he slapped out short bursts with the 15mm tail gun. "I hate this kind of flying. Lieutenant, I hope you know we'll have to climb to get above the bomb dispersal pattern." "I do," said Alvarez, twisting the gunship across the increasingly narrow canyon floor. "Come on, Mitch. I don't like this kind of flying either." "Now, Julia, now. Up and to the left. Eject weapons and keep firing that tail gun." Hunter was still giving his orders when the cutlass reared onto its tail and swung to the canyon's southern wall. An instant later, the two gray pods on its outboard wing racks were kicked away by the ejectors. They barely had time to unfold their stabilizing fins and clear the ship before compressed gas charges ripped them open. Freed from more than half a ton of ordnance, the CFAH-3 leapt out of the canyon as hundreds of bomblets scattered across its floor. In place of short bursts, Taylor hosed the pursuing Sky Witches with a continuous stream of armor-piercing and explosive-tipped shells. Their delicate rotor heads suddenly vulnerable, the drones immediately began jinxing more erratically. Two collided, and their fireball was still expanding when the formation reached the freshly sown carpet of bomblets. They detonated in a surging wave of explosions, filling the canyon with shrapnel. More clouds of sand, and countless shockwaves. All the while, more shells continued to be sprayed from the retreating cutlass, and collision debris started to rain down. The surviving drones did not remain so for long. Their programming, overwhelmed by so many threats at once, they either crashed into the ground, the canyon walls, or each other. The capital gunship hovered just above the canyon rim, waiting for any to appear, when all it was greeted with was rising columns of smoke. It turned once again to the south and increased speed. "Is that it, Captain? Are we in the clear?" asked Halston. "Not yet. We're still 80 kilometers from our own frontier. said Hunter, switching back to the tactical map. Julia, this is Mitch. Keep us low. They may not be pursuing us, but Cybernetic can still track us. Will do, though I don't think they'll be paying much attention to us, Alvarez replied. Take a look at the incoming data traffic. The Air Force has finally decided to show up. With a few strokes of the terminal's keyboard, Hunter increased the map's scale until it included the frontier line. Crossing it were formations of symbols he recognized as standing for capital fighters and attack bombers. There were several dozens of them, moving at different speeds and altitudes, and appearing like a major strike force. In place of the gunship, they now received the lion's share of Cybertronic's attention, as evidenced by the terminal's tactical readouts on the missile battery status, radar operating modes, and the movement of airborne Cybertronic aircraft. So long as we don't attract attention to ourselves, we'll be across the frontier line in 35 minutes, said Hunter, rotating the overhead terminal for Sutter to see. And about 5 minutes after that, we'll be landing at our designated forward base, she said, where we'll be refueled, and Dirk and I will send our reports up the line. I have to tell you, Captain, that some of the things you did were highly unorthodox. I'll have to report them. I must also report what happened to Dirk. I doubt he'll say he ran into something. This sounds familiar, Parker noted, a resigned tone in her voice. We've been successful in our mission, and we're in trouble again. When is this gonna end? When they stop assigning military advisors to operational units, said Vanetti, growing angry. We don't need someone looking over our shoulders all the time and quoting us corporate protocol. All right, Sergeant, don't get worked up, said Hunter. You might say something that'll have to be reported up the line. Let's just wait until we reach the forward base before we start worrying or griping over what kind of trouble we're in.
Mutant Chronicles, Fiction. The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 2, Frenzy, by John Allen Price. Chapter 1, End.